What's happening, guys? Today I'm going over everything that caught fish for me and everybody else on the Ocean Odyssey 1.5 day trip about a week and a half ago. Just want to fill you in so that way you can put the pieces of the puzzle together a little bit faster and hopefully catch more fish than I did on my trip. I caught 2 bluefin tunas, so it ended up being a good trip, but mine came down to like the 9th inning. I didn't catch my fish till 11:30 the next day, but I'm going to tell you how it started. So basically we got out to tuna grounds around 11 p.m. the first night, Friday night, and I started out with a 225 gram jig. The guys that were catching fish that first night were using 400 and 500 gram size jigs. There was no current. The wind was flat. I thought the smaller jigs were going to be the way to go, but the guys with the bigger jigs were catching them. So that's one thing I learned and I'm going to be applying, going forward, is if you see guys catch them on bigger size jigs, no matter what the conditions are, like your preconceived notions of what you think should be working, or like based off previous reports, I would go ahead and make that switch, because those bluefin tunas are definitely one of the hardest fish to catch. They're in different moods every day, and if you see something that's working, odds are it's probably going to work for you, right? Especially if it's like a reoccurring thing, if like 2 guys catch fish on 400 or 500 gram size jigs, switch over to that bigger size, get rid of the small ones. So the jigs that did work were, the one I used was Major Craft Jig Para jigs, 400 gram and 500 gram. I used the 400 gram size. And then the big Mustad Rip Rollers. I saw guys catch them on 400 and 500 gram size jigs. I was talking to my buddy Ian, and he's like, dude, did you see that guy just caught a fish on that 500 gram Mustad thing? It's giant. And I was like, I cannot believe it. But it is what it is, right? Like, fish are fish. They'll eat what they want. So even though you don't think they should be eating it, switch gears if that's what's working for somebody else on the boat. The colors that worked well on the boat, I noticed a lot of guys were fishing the Katy Perry that were catching fish. So that's blue and pink, a little bit of silver and glow. And then a lot of candy cane action, silver with some glow, or like, this is Katy Perry candy cane. I wouldn't get too in the weeds about the colors. I usually stick to a few simple ones. I like candy cane, some kind of blue, whether that's blue and sardine, like a Colt Sniper. What I mean by blue and sardine is like blue, a little bit of yellow, and then like a white belly. But green works too. I'm a big fan of like a greenback, something like that, a little more sardine-ish looking than like a blue. But red works. I didn't see a whole lot of guys catch any fish on the red jigs like this last trip, but the purple back was working well. I forget the name of the jig, but they were catching fish on like a purple and silver, something like that. Doesn't have to have glow on it. I've seen guys catching fish with just lead weights and treble hooks on them, like those Eddie Bomb style jigs. Those are working real well. These BFTs, a little more compact. The long knife jigs worked at night, and the more compact jigs worked during the day. I saw a guy catch one on a Daiwa Saltiga SK jig. I think it was one size smaller than this, but during the day I would switch up to a small flat fall, a small SK jig, or like a Colt Sniper style jig. Most of the bites we got during the day, though, or the boat got, I didn't get any bites, was on the fly line. Okay, so use as small as gear as possible. What I mean by that is I use Seaguar Gold Label because I can use like 40 pound, but it's only got the line diameter of like 30 pound. So I typically go with like a 40 or 50 pound fluoro for fly line fishing. And then the number 1 owner Mudo circle hooks is what I would recommend. Some guys are using J hooks. I like the Mudos. Never had them bend out. 9 times out of 10, if you hook that fish, you're gonna land it. They don't come off mid-fight. I think circle hooks are phenomenal, and I use them whenever I possibly can. That fly line rig worked better than like a sinker rig on my trip. That's obviously subject to change any day now. But when we were out, the fly line was getting the most bites, and it was on the long soak. A lot of times you throw your fly line out, let it sit there, and like within the first 30 seconds, you're getting bit or you're not getting bit. But on this trip, it was a long soak, getting that bait way far away from the boat and just letting that sardine do its thing was the key. The guys were hooking them in the butt, and what I mean by that is hooking them in that lower back third. I typically like to hook mine in the top back 1/3 because I think when those tuna are coming up and they're looking at that sardine, they don't see as much of that hook when you hook them on the top. But it didn't seem to make a difference on this last trip. I fished all day, tried several things, but mostly flatline fish. I didn't catch anything. So I did get some bites though at night when those fish turned back on and were back on the knife jig bite. The first fish I caught was on the wind up. So I dropped it down, and I've talked about it in some of my other videos. I'm a huge advocate of staying straight up and down as much as possible. A lot of my bites that I've caught, bluefin, yellowfin, have been when I'm winding that jig as fast as I possibly can, and they'll smoke it on the way up. You don't have to vertical jig. I tried doing some vertical jigging where it was like a pull and crank down. Basically that jig is going up, falling, up, falling, up, falling, and you're just kind of picking up that slack as you pump the rod and drop it. I didn't get any bites on that, but I did get my bite just winding that jig as fast as I possibly could back to the top. And I think metered line is absolutely crucial when you guys are fishing knife jigs at night, because if the captain's marking them from 150 to 250, obviously you want to work your jig all the way through that zone, get down to I like to be generous with it, get down to 300, work that jig all the way back up to about 125, and then you kind of can back off the gas and just slowly crank up that 400 or 500 gram jig, and then I'll make another drop. I usually only do one down and one up per drop. That's just how I like to fish. Some guys will do it 2 or 3 times. If you're getting scoped out, I would definitely just, like ideally you want to be as straight up and down as possible. And I think if my jig goes down and then through, I'm probably not going to get bit on that second drop and then wind up. So I usually like to reset, maybe put my jig in front of some different fish. The second fish I caught was on the drop. And a couple things that I'm going to be applying going forward as well is when the boat is coming, he backs off the engine, the captain does, and the boat is sliding, don't drop your jig too early, because if you drop your jig too early, that boat is still sliding pretty fast. Your line is going to be ripping off your reel, and you're not going to know if you get bit on the drop because the boat is moving so fast away from the jig and where you're at. You're just not going to know. So I like to let it slide, and then as it's coming to a crawl, that is when I'll be paying attention to the captain. Hopefully he's saying, hey, we're running to the fish now, or the fish are under us good. Then I'll pitch towards the bow and let that jig drop. And that way, by the time it's in the zone, it's towards the stern. I'm straight up and down, and I am marking my line, let it get down to that 300 foot, and then I'm going to work that jig, like I said, straight up and down, back up as fast as possible. But I got bit on, I think it was like the second or third school we stopped on that night on the drop, and that fish hit it on the starboard stern, and it took me all the way to the port bow in about 1 minute. And I actually got bit on the way down. I cranked, and I thought I had a bite. I did have a bite, and I cranked and just didn't come tight on anything. I was like, well, maybe one just like hit it, didn't hook up, didn't swallow the jig or whatever. And I opened my bail again, and when I opened my bail, the line was still slack. And then that is when I really just wind as fast as I possibly could. That fish shot straight to the surface and went all the way up to that port bow. And he got up to the surface and actually dove back down and then started doing his death spirals, and I caught him. But that is a huge lesson. If you guys get bit on that jig, those tuna are coming through and they're swallowing that whole thing. Like they're like a suction. Like they're just eating that jig. They're not like a wahoo where they're coming by slashing it or picking at it. They're either eating that jig or they're not. So that is one thing. Those tuna will hit it and they'll run straight to the surface, and they will run faster than you can wind that reel. So just if you think you got a bite, you got nothing to lose. Just wind as much as you possibly can until you're 110% sure you do not have a fish. For rod and reel selection that I used, I like spinning rods because they offer more mobility in my opinion. This one is a Shimano Travala extra heavy 5.8, and then I've got a Shimano Sargosa 25,000 with Power Pro metered line. And this spinning rod combo made pretty quick work of those 45-pound tunas. So I don't know. I get a lot of hate for fishing, spinning rods. Obviously, if you have a spinning rod that's not heavy enough to catch those bluefin, you're going to get your tail whooped. But that rod, I've caught big ones on it before, and it's no problem. You guys just have to make sure you've got the right size leader, right size line. You got to have the line capacity and a heavier rod. I like a spinning rod because I'm a lot more comfortable with it. I can wind that jig a lot faster, and I can make drops back to back to back and not get worn out. I had a Penn Carnage combo with a Speedmaster 25 on it, and it just is like heavy and awkward, and I don't feel like I'm getting the most out of the fishing experience as far as being able to work my gear because it's so heavy and awkward. So if you're having that issue, maybe look for a lighter rod or switch up to a spinning rod combo. So I know the culture is pretty rigid out here on the West Coast as far as using conventional gear, but find something that works for you. Don't get discouraged if people talk bad about it. And have your own style of fishing. Have fun. Enjoy fishing. The last thing I'll leave you guys with is on every stop, you have a chance of catching a fish. So don't get discouraged. I took like 1-2 hour nap, but other than that, I fished from 11 p.m. or 12 p.m. all the way till like 12 p.m. the next day. And I was hopeful the entire time. You just got to keep your head up, keep trying, stick with the gear that you know is working, and it can happen at any point. I caught my 2 bluefin tunas in like the last 30 minutes of the trip. So if I would have got discouraged or kind of like been fishing half-assed, I probably wouldn't have caught those fish. So just keep your head up, keep trying, put those pieces of the puzzle together, talk to the guys on the boat. Most of them are pretty cool and going to want to help you out. It's a team effort, whether you try not to get tangled up or just kind of talking fishing gear. A lot of guys that are going fishing are like-minded like you. You know what I mean? They're cool dudes. So just talk to them, ask them what's working, and I think you guys will catch more fish when we work together. That's like the whole reason I do this podcast and YouTube video stuff, is just kind of sharing the info of what has worked well for me. I'm not saying it's the only way to be done. Everybody rigs stuff different. I got my jigs with treble hooks on the bottom and a stinger hook on top. Some guys only fish like 2 stinger hooks on top, and both ways work well. But if you guys have any input or questions, I'm more than happy to help you out. Just hit me up at Obseadian Fishing on Instagram. Shoot me a DM on there. I'll get back to you as soon as I can, and if I can do anything to help you guys out, I would love to. And until next time, boys, tight lines.